What if I told you that most people do not lose power because they are weak? They lose power because they do not understand the hidden strings that move human behavior. You struggle in relationships. You struggle in negotiations. You struggle in influence. Not because you lack strength, but because you do not understand psychology. Tonight we uncover the blind spots that control people in modern society. The same psychological levers a strategist like Machiavelli would study, not to harm, but to understand power itself. If you do not learn these forces, you will be ruled by them. Look closely at the modern world. It pretends to worship independence, yet it runs on approval. People say they are strong. They say they do not care what others think. They speak of confidence as if it were armor. But watch them when a message is left on read. Watch them when praise is given to someone else. Watch how quickly certainty turns into doubt. This is where power begins. Machiavelli did not waste his time studying what people claimed to be. He studied what they feared. And nothing terrifies the human heart more than insignificance. To be unseen, to be unimportant. Validation is the antidote to that fear. When someone says, "You matter," the nervous system relaxes. When someone withholds that reassurance, the mind begins to spiral. This is not weakness. This is biology. We are wired for belonging. Our ancestors survived in tribes. Exile meant death. And though the jungle has changed into cities and screens, the wiring has not in every room, in every relationship, in every negotiation. There is an invisible exchange happening. It is not money. It is not status. It is approval. Who gives it? Who withholds it? Who depends on it? The one who depends on it loses leverage. Understand this carefully. People do not work harder only for money. They work harder for recognition. They do not stay loyal only for love. They stay loyal for reassurance. They do not argue only to win. They argue to protect their image in your eyes. If your opinion can raise their confidence, you hold influence. But influence does not come from constant praise. Constant praise loses value. What is always available is rarely respected. Machiavelli understood that predictability weakens authority. If rewards are guaranteed, they stop being rewards. The mind becomes attached to what feels uncertain. Give validation too freely, and you become background noise. Offer it selectively, and you become significant. When your approval is earned rather than given, it carries weight. The human brain begins to associate your recognition with achievement, and soon, people are not just acting for their own goals. They are acting for your acknowledgement. This is how subtle dependency forms. Likes, comments, reactions, tiny signals of acceptance. Each notification delivers a small surge of pleasure. Remove it, and discomfort appears. That discomfort is power, waiting to be understood. Those who constantly seek validation become predictable. They adjust their personality to maintain applause. They soften their standards to avoid criticism. They tolerate disrespect to prevent rejection. And here lies the strategic truth. If you master your own need for validation, you immediately shift positions. When you no longer require approval to feel secure, you stop negotiating from desperation. Your tone changes. Your posture changes. Your silence gains gravity. People sense it. They sense when someone is not performing for approval. They sense when someone's confidence is not borrowed from the room. That kind of presence creates attraction, authority, and influence. Without effort, Machiavelli would say that power belongs to those who understand desire. And the desire for validation is universal. In relationships, the person who fears losing approval gives up boundaries. In business, the person who craves praise over respect accepts poor terms. In social dynamics, the one who needs to be liked becomes easy to steer. But the individual who is comfortable being misunderstood, who does not collapse under disapproval, who does not chase applause, that person becomes stable ground in a world of emotional volatility, and stability commands attention. When you do not react to withheld praise, others become curious. When you are not shaken by criticism, others become cautious. When you validate selectively and sincerely, your words gain impact. This is not about manipulation. It is about awareness. Every interaction contains a silent question. Do I still have your approval? The one who asks that question internally is already negotiating from below. The one who does not need to ask it moves freely. And once you recognize who is driven by validation, once you see the subtle shifts in tone, the extra effort, the nervous laughter, the over-explaining, you begin to understand how behavior is shaped long before logic enters the conversation. Because beneath ambition, beneath romance, beneath competition, beneath confidence itself, there is a quiet hunger to be seen, to be chosen, to be enough. There is a force stronger than desire, stronger than attraction, stronger than logic, stronger than logic, stronger than logic. Machiavelli understood something timeless about human nature. People are more driven to avoid pain than to pursue pleasure. The promise of gain excites them, yes, but the threat of losing what they already have terrifies them. And fear, when understood, becomes leverage. Look around you. Why does someone suddenly care more when attention is withdrawn? Why does value increase the moment availability decreases? Why does silence create anxiety where constant presence created comfort? Scarcity creates intensity. When something feels guaranteed, the mind relaxes. It assumes permanence. It delays effort. It postpones appreciation. But the moment permanence is questioned, behavior changes instantly. This is not cruelty. This is psychology. The human mind attaches deeply. Once attached, it begins to fear separation. In relationships, this fear shows itself in subtle ways. A shift in tone is overanalyzed. A delayed reply becomes a story of rejection. A small distance feels like a looming departure. The imagination becomes the enemy, and imagination amplifies scarcity. Machiavelli would observe this carefully. A ruler who is always accessible becomes ordinary. A ruler whose presence is limited becomes significant. When access is controlled, importance increases. When attention is selective, it gains value. People chase what feels rare. But here is the deeper truth. Scarcity does not only apply to physical presence, it applies to emotional energy, time, approval, affection, and commitment. When you are always available, your presence becomes assumed. When you are selective, your presence becomes desired. Fear of abandonment awakens effort. Think about negotiations. The moment a deal feels like it might disappear, urgency rises. Think about social dynamics. The moment someone senses they may lose a connection, their investment increases. Think about authority. The moment loyalty is uncertain, behavior adjusts. Loss sharpens focus. The human brain evolved to protect what it has. Losing resources once meant death. Losing connection once meant exile. That ancient wiring still operates beneath modern conversations. This is why perceived distance creates attraction. This is why unpredictability creates obsession. This is why endings often generate more emotion than beginnings. Machiavelli wrote that it is safer to be feared than loved if one cannot be both, because fear of loss is a more reliable motivator than affection alone. Love can fade, comfort can dull urgency, but fear of losing access, losing position, losing significance, that activates survival instincts. Observe how quickly priorities change when something feels threatened. Suddenly, messages are sent faster, promises are made more seriously. Effort increases without being asked. Scarcity exposes value. Yet here is the strategic insight few understand. Artificial scarcity without substance collapses. True leverage comes not from manipulation, but from genuine independence. If you can walk away, your presence carries weight. If you cannot walk away, your presence carries need. People sense the difference instantly. When you are internally dependent on someone staying, you overextend, you tolerate more. You explain more, you chase reassurance. But when you are capable of loss without collapse, your stance changes. Your words become measured, your reactions slow, your energy stabilizes. And stability in the face of possible loss creates power, because fear of abandonment only controls those who believe they have no alternatives. Machiavelli would not advise cruelty. He would advise control. Control of access, control of timing, control of emotional exposure. Not to wound, but to prevent becoming predictable. Predictability reduces perceived value. The modern world has created constant availability, instant replies, continuous updates, endless access, and in this constant exposure, mystery dies, anticipation dies, but remove certainty, and the mind begins to chase. The key is this: do not create fear, simply refuse to remove all uncertainty. When people know they must earn continued access, they invest differently. When they sense that your time is limited and your standards are firm, they step carefully. When they understand that your presence is a privilege, not an obligation, they treat it accordingly. The fear of abandonment is powerful because it is tied to identity. Losing someone is not just losing them, it is losing who we are with them. And once you understand that attachment shapes behavior more than logic ever, will you begin to see how distance, how silence, how selective presence reshapes the balance of power without a single word being spoken. Every human being carries an image of themselves in their mind, a story they tell themselves about who they are, what they deserve, and how the world perceives them. This story is fragile, and it is defended fiercely. Machiavelli understood that. People do not act solely out of reason. They act to preserve the narrative they have built about themselves. Challenge that narrative, and you awaken instinctive reactions. Support it, and you gain influence without effort. Observe how people behave when their identity is threatened. Watch how quickly reason gives way to emotion. Watch how anger replaces logic when someone's self-image feels attacked. It is subtle at first, a defensive comment, a hesitation, a justification. Then it grows into louder assertions, repeated insistence, sometimes even aggression. People are not just protecting themselves, they are protecting the version of themselves that they have invested in emotionally, socially, and psychologically. Identity is ego's fortress, and most human interaction revolves around its preservation. From early childhood, we are taught who we are and what roles we should play. As adults, we cling to these roles, often unconsciously because they give structure to chaos. Change threatens the comfort of predictability. Disagreement threatens the foundation of self-worth. And when self-worth feels endangered, behavior becomes reactive, extreme, and predictable in patterns that can be observed and, in some cases, anticipated. Machiavelli would recognize this as a lever of influence. The strategist does not attack the fortress directly. He manipulates the perception of safety and threat around it. Praise the ego, and you gain alignment. Question the ego subtly, and you test boundaries. Challenge it overtly, and you spark rebellion. The human mind is wired to resist loss of identity above almost any other form of loss, and the closer the attachment, the stronger the response. In modern dynamics, identity attachment manifests in many ways. People are attached to their beliefs, their social status, their moral framework, even their personal preferences. Contradicting them directly rarely succeeds. Instead, influencing behavior is most effective when the ego is preserved, or when the threat is framed as a challenge that the person can overcome while maintaining their self-concept. The more threatened the ego feels, the more energy and focus the individual will dedicate to defending it, often blind to rational reasoning. Ego protection also explains why arguments rarely work when facts alone are presented. Facts challenge identity indirectly. People defend the narrative they believe in, even when it is flawed, because accepting the flaw feels like a personal failure. They seek allies, they rationalize, they double down. The mind instinctively protects the self. And this instinct is universal. No one is immune. Even the most logical, seemingly detached individuals will act to shield their identity when pressed. Understanding this, a strategist learns patience and precision. Influence is not about overwhelming force. It is about subtle alignment with identity. If you align your presence and actions with the ego of others, they act in ways that serve both their self-concept and your objectives. When you misalign with ego, resistance rises exponentially. And the fascinating truth is that identity attachment does not only constrain behavior, it directs it. People will expend energy, take risks, and make sacrifices, not for truth, not for logic, but to defend the version of themselves they cherish most. In every social interaction, negotiation, and relationship, this principle operates silently. Observe who reacts defensively when their ideas are questioned. Watch who over-explains to justify themselves. Notice who clings to status, reputation, or recognition. These are the signs of identity attachment at work. The person who is anchored to a fixed ego narrative will navigate the world through its lens, often without awareness of the influence it exerts on their decisions. And yet, there is a counterbalance. The individual who masters self-awareness, who can separate self-worth from external validation, becomes less predictable, more resilient, and capable of influencing without overt pressure. This is the quiet power that Machiavelli prized: control over oneself and observation of others, using knowledge of human attachment to identity, not as a weapon to harm, but as a lens to navigate human behavior, influence outcomes, and anticipate reactions before they manifest of one's. Once you recognize the invisible force of ego protection, you understand why logic alone rarely persuades, why emotional triggers hold so much sway, and bend according to the story they tell themselves, and why those who can navigate identity without attacking it hold the advantage in every interaction. Power, influence, and human behavior are never simple. Machiavelli knew this centuries ago, and today the principles remain just as potent, only the battlefield has changed. Emotional dependency, the fear of abandonment, and identity attachment are not weaknesses to exploit in others. They are forces to understand, forces that shape decisions, drive loyalty, and dictate outcomes. When you grasp these dynamics, you stop reacting blindly. You see the subtle signals, the hidden motivations, and the invisible levers that guide behavior. You begin to recognize who seeks validation, who fears loss, and who clings to identity, not to judge, but to navigate the social world with clarity and confidence. True power is not in manipulation for selfish gain. It is in awareness, self-mastery, and strategic observation. The person who understands these forces can influence outcomes without conflict, anticipate reactions before they arise, and maintain stability in a world driven by emotion and perception. By mastering your own ed for approval, controlling your presence strategically, and observing the invisible pull of ego in others, you step into a higher plane of influence. You move through relationships, negotiations, and social dynamics with foresight. You are no longer at the mercy of forces. You cannot see. You become the observer, the strategist, and the silent navigator of human behavior. In the end, Machiavelli's greatest lesson is timeless. Power does not belong to the loudest or the strongest. It belongs to those who understand human nature and use that understanding to move through the world with precision, patience, and presence. Those who see clearly, act deliberately, and control themselves first, gain influence naturally. And in that influence, true mastery unfolds.